Today I'm going to be going over the history and characteristics of learning disabilities. The objective is going to be to give a better understanding of the history of learning disabilities and their characteristics. Learning disabilities are the most prevalent disability. Almost half of all students receiving services under IDEA 04 are identified with a learning disability. The term learning disability was not used until the early 1960s. However, the historical roots of the idea go back over 200 years. In 1974, J. Lee Wiederholt identified 4 periods and how learning disabilities have been understood. Those 4 periods include the foundational phase, transitional phase, integration phase, and the current phase right now. During the foundational phase, they emphasize basic scientific research related to the brain, the relationship of injury to specific areas of the adult brain, and the corresponding loss of specific functions such as language skills or perceptual skills. The transition phase marked the application of brain research to the study of children. In the early 1940s, Heinz Werner and Alfred Strauss began to bring the field of study of neurology into education. They noticed similarities between some of the characteristics of children who were having learning problems and those adults who had suffered brain injury. They came up with terms like minimal brain injury and minimal brain dysfunction, which were the early terms for learning disability, before the term was coined. The term learning disability was coined in 1963 by Dr. Sam Kirk. This is when the recognition of learning disabilities within school programs began. Emphasis was placed on perceptual skills, the role in children's learning through the work of researchers such as William Cruikshank, Newell, Kefnart, Marianne Frostig. Sorry if I messed the names up. Their views emphasized on perceptual nature of learning disabilities. Their idea was flawed in the end, but it led to much more research and interest in the nature of learning disabilities. And then during the current phase, which is now, it's kind of a time of emerging and future directions in the field. We emphasize interventions focusing on academic and behavioral and cognitive language areas. Research is on strategies and supports that can help the students now instead of what it's coming from. There's 2 definitions of a learning disability. The first is the IDEA 04 definition, which is just listed out right here. It's the general definition. A specific learning disability means a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken and written, that may manifest in an imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or to do mathematical calculations, including conditions such as perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. It also has the disorders not included, which is specific learning disabilities, learning problems that are primarily the result of visual, hearing, or motor abilities, of mental retardation, emotional disturbance, or environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantage. Then there's the NJCDL definition. The NJCDL is the National Joint Committee on Learning Disabilities. It's an organization consisting of 13 organizations, including the Council of Learning Disabilities. Their definition, it defines learning disabilities as involving deficits in a number of academic and cognitive areas. It's somewhat like the IDEA definition, but it has different aspects. That first one is an aspect that's in both, and then for them, that's not included in the IDEA, they have a definition. Their definition eliminates the psychological processing deficit that's in the IDEA definition. The prevalence of learning disabilities, there's about 5% of school-age children have been identified with a learning disability. In 2000, exactly, the number in 2005 was 5.24% of children 16 to 17 years old. That's about one or two students in a 30 children classroom. Boys are 3 to 4 times more likely to receive services for learning disabilities than girls, and it seems that African American students with learning disabilities are underrepresented, but on the website, the African American Children's Learning Disability website, it says that there is 15% of all students are African American and 21% of those students are in special education. They think that the numbers look so much higher because they're placed in there improperly without the right screenings. They just put them in there assuming. There's many different causes for learning disabilities. The first one's neurological causes. It can be related to a deficit in the central nervous system. It could be due to brain injury, brain development, or brain structure problems. There's minimal brain injury, which again was one of the early terms for a learning disability. It suggests a loss of brain functioning due to brain damage. Researchers in the 20th century proposed that learning disabilities are caused by lags in neurological development as opposed to the loss of neurological function. So they're saying the problem's due to a slow brain, not a broken brain. As early as 1905, Hishelwood found familial relationships in individuals with learning problems. There was twin studies that were done that show that reading problems are more frequent in identical twins than in fraternal twins. So that just reinforces the genetic cause. It's in their DNA clearly. And then the prevalence of dyscalculia, which is a severe math disability, is 10 times higher in families that have a person with the problem than just in the general population. There's environmental causes, which include prenatal, perinatal, and postnatal. The prenatal are factors known to harm a fetus, including drug use, alcohol consumption, and smoking while the mother's pregnant. Perinatal factors include complications during childbirth, such as anoxia, which is the loss of oxygen that can affect the newborn. And postnatal factors are causes learning disabilities after the child's born. Any factor that can cause neurological problems to the brain can potentially cause a learning problem. Some of these include meningitis and indigestion of harsh substances or chemicals when the child's young. The characteristics of students with learning disabilities. In 1963, a task force identified 10 commonly exhibited characteristics of minimal brain dysfunction, which is now it's called a learning disability. These 10 characteristics included hyperactivity, perceptual motor impairments, emotional liability, general coordination deficits, disorder of attention, impulsivity, disorders of memory and thinking, specific learning disabilities, disorders of speech and hearing, and equivocal neurological signs. The task force findings reinforce the neurological basis of learning disabilities. And characteristics related to reading. Some children with reading problems don't have any learning disability, and the two terms are not interchangeable. Just because they have a reading disability or a reading problem doesn't mean they have a learning disability. They're two totally different things. It just so happens that many children that have a learning disability also have a reading problem, and that's about 90% of kids could also have a reading problem if they have a learning disability. Dyslexia is one of the most severe reading problems. However, less than 1% of all individuals have pure dyslexia. Some people have traits of it, but not the full-blown thing. Reading disability and dyslexia are also not interchangeable terms. They're two totally different things. A reading disability is just a problem with reading. Dyslexia is an actual, like, its own condition. There's phonological awareness, which is the recognition that words, syllables, or sounds exist in spoken language, and the ability to manipulate them by deleting, adding, substituting, and transposing different parts. Then rapid automatic naming is quickly naming stimuli such as digits, letters, naming of simple objects relating to early reading ability. Children who have problems with the rapid automatic naming are likely to have a reading problem. It's the ability, if you show a flashcard of A, they can say it's A. So if they have a problem with that, it's going to cause a lot of problems in the future. And these two things are things that are going to likely indicate that there is a learning disability in the child, not just a reading disability. And the Matthew effect says that a good reader will become a better reader, and a poor reader will become a poor reader. This is the reason that it's so important to catch a reading problem early on, because reading is linked to any other academic thing that the child's going to do. Characteristics of learning disabilities in math. About 25% of students with a learning disability receive learning disability services for math. That's not as high as reading, but it's still a significant amount of children. Many kids with math problems, they're going to persist into their adulthood, so it's something that it's really nice to work on while they're young so that you can get a hold on it so that they can help themselves with it before it's too hard when they're older. Students with learning disabilities often have problems with calculation, knowledge of math facts, understanding math concepts, and problem-solving skills. They also have a more difficult time with word problems and retrieving math information from long-term memory. It's not as easy for them to remember as another student that doesn't have a learning disability. For writing and written expression, many children with learning disabilities have problems with poor handwriting, or it takes them longer to write. Spelling's usually very difficult, and written language and written expression, which could be because of the difficulty with handwriting and spelling. Problems with written expression include difficulties in composing words, making full compositional sentences, and using their punctuation and capitalization correctly. Expressive and written language. Many states actually have a program specifically for children with a language learning disability. It's called an LLD. Expressive language is producing language. Receptive language is understanding it. And it's important to detect these kinds of disabilities because they generally have a direct effect on many other academic areas like reading and writing. However, some students, just as with any other one, they can have super strong verbal skills but still have a learning disability. Cognition is different than intelligence. Students with disabilities can often have an IQ in the gifted range, but it can also be down in the low range. Cognition is essentially thinking. It involves a number of specific subareas. They're the attention, memory and strategy use, and metacognition. Attention is difficulty focusing on their current task or distractibility. Memory and strategy use is problems with both visual and auditory short-term memory. Memory problems are related to difficulty or failure to use strategies that facilitate remembering. So again, with their long-term memory, it's hard to remember the stuff that they were learning before. Metacognition is the regulation of the awareness and use of strategies to learn new information. So if they're being taught something new in class, it's hard for them to understand that. Many students with learning disabilities have some type of problem in a social and emotional area. It's estimated that 1/3 of all students with learning disabilities have social deficits. That's about 33%. That's also a really big number if you look at it in the full. Students with learning disabilities are more likely to be socially rejected by their peers and are likely to have fewer friends and a lower social status. Some other behavior problems related to learning disabilities can include depression, anxiety disorders, and antisocial personality disorders. These students often have low self-concept, and they've been reported to also have cases or signs of learned helplessness, which refers to the situation in which individuals have an inaccurate insight into the nature of their behavior. They attribute successes to luck. Like their successes are attributed to the external factors, and then their failures to internal factors. Like, it's all my fault. I could have done better. That's about it for everything. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me in the contact box. Discussion board it, whatever you want. You can email me there, and then I have this pop quiz. So click on the link. If the link doesn't work, I'll also provide it in the body of the presentation. So that's about it. Thank you.